When did your something is very wrong here feeling turned out to be true? My siblings and I were swimming at a neighbor's house with their kid, but the adults were inside. Randomly a thought came into my head of where's my sister at? She easily could've gone inside or have walked across the street and be home, but I felt like I needed to find her as soon as possible. I got all of us kids to search when we noticed she was at the bottom of the pool, completely blue. She made a complete recovery and is one of the best parts of my life. Have a friend that would essentially answer a text message during 6. He was that attached to his phone. He didn't get back to me one day and I noticed his FB hadn't been updated yet. I tried hitting him up a few more times. Something didn't feel right. Told a few friends. Most wrote it off as nothing because this guy always seems happy. He lives like an hour away. Finally I get someone to go with me to hang out with him. Worst case, we'd say we were gonna be in the neighborhood, that's why we were hitting him up. Had we not done that, he was going to kill himself that night. We showed up, and he just started crying immediately and saying that he needed help. We outright intervened in a friend's suicide. He was always so active on social media as a way to hide his depression. It chills me to this day that if maybe I don't write him and get a strange odd feeling that a friend might not be here today. There is such a thing as a feeling of impending doom when your body is like, yo, you are about to die. It is a real thing. I had not been feeling well, and all of a sudden I sat up and had a distinct feeling of you are going to die soon if you don't do something. I drove myself to the ER and on the way was getting chest pains. I went in, told them, and they took me to the back. After some tests there were a lot of people around me injecting me with a lot of different stuff. Turns out I had a pulmonary embolism, blood clot in my lung, which at any second could have gone to my brain and killed me then and there. The doctor said if I had left it any longer I would have been dead. Thanks brain. The end of April, my friend and I were to meet up for drinks. He didn't show, didn't answer his phone, didn't respond to my texts. I knew he was dead. I got the call the next day. He died in a car crash on his way to meet me. 4 students of mine won the first prize for a project they did, and we all got a free trip to London. We had spent the day sightseeing and were exhausted, so we got an ice cream and sat on a bench in a park to relax. A couple of minutes later I noticed this couple walk by slowly, staring at us. My spidey senses go mental. I do not like these people for some reason. She walks by and sits on the bench next to ours, and he sits on the bench across from hers. They aren't talking, just looking at each other. And that is when I notice her reaching into her pockets. I jump up, grab my students and run out of the park. My poor students are confused AF and wondering WTF is wrong with me when all of a sudden we hear screaming. Turns out she stabbed a couple walking through the park, trying to rob them. It scares the ever-loving f out of me knowing, had I not gotten my students out of there, we would have been stabbed and robbed. I, female, was just 20, in London on my own. On my own I met a guy, I can't remember how, and we went to a pub for a drink. I took a photo of him with my camera, and then he asked for the camera, and took some photos of me, and looked through them. We left the pub, and he was trying to get me to go somewhere in particular, while I just wanted to stay public, and go to another pub. I felt like something was off, and he seemed to get angry that I wasn't willing to go with him, so I basically walked away from him. Later I was looking through the photos on my camera, and realized that he had deleted the photo I took of him. I'm certain he had a bad plan for me, and I learned a really valuable lesson that day. My dad has had health issues since 2008 when the first stroke hit. Since then he was always in and out of hospitals, and it became just another thing. It happened so much that he would dismiss symptoms just so he wouldn't have to go to the hospital again. It became even worse when he was diagnosed with stage 4 kidney failure and had to do dialysis 3 times a week. Anyway, I went to visit him about a month ago, and out of the blue he kinda looks at his hand and says, "You know, my finger has been smelling funny lately." I'm all incredulous, and I tell him funny smells usually means infections. I joke around and tell him he needs to get it looked at before they have to amputate it. Spoiler alert, by the time he had it looked at, the blood flow to the finger was compromised due to a fistula in his arm. He needed to get it amputated. This is where the funny feeling kicked in. My grandmother, his mom, passed away in '98 after her leg was amputated. The fact that he had to have anything amputated starting making me anxious, and I dismissed it as being over dramatic. His surgery was the Friday before Mother's Day, and I went to visit him after work to see how he was feeling. He was so groggy and kept falling asleep at the table, so my mom and I basically carry him to his bed. He's a proud man, super old school in a I'm a man, I don't need my wife and daughter helping me kind of way, but he clung to us because he just couldn't do it on his own. We got him to the bed and he couldn't even lift his legs up. I had to do it for him and stick some pillows under his head. I looked over at my mom and the look on her face made my stomach drop, and I asked her if she wanted me to stay with her tonight. You know, just in case. She said yes. 2 AM I go downstairs to check on them because I can't sleep. He starts moving around and trying to take his sweater vest off because he's hot. He was still wearing the clothes from earlier. So I help him unzip it, and he wakes up briefly, sees that it's me and smiles. He puts his good hand on my arm and just smiles. 4 AM Saturday morning mom wakes me up and real calmly says she doesn't think daddy is breathing. I knew it before I entered the room because in addition to the kidney issues, he had some breathing problems too and always took laborious breaths when he slept. It was quiet. I hesitated to use the term dead quiet because that's exactly what it was. We called 911 and the ambulance came. They got him back, lost him, got him back again, but said he was clinically brain dead and we should probably call the family. So we do. 1 AM Mother's Day my sister and I are standing watch in the room. We agreed to sleep in shifts and it was her turn. My anxiety is skyrocketing and my fight or flight is kicking in and I just want to leave and go for a walk around the halls to calm my mind. So I get up, and as I'm passing his bed my anxiety becomes more direct, if that makes sense. I suddenly felt that I needed to be there. So I stood by his bed and held his hand. I told him that we were there with him and just spoke about anything that came to my head because honestly I'm just flying on autopilot when it came to cognitive function. I do remember saying, right before I sat down, that I know he's tired and that we don't want him to hurt anymore and we'll always love him. I went to go sit back down because I was crying and a few minutes later the machine started going haywire. He passed at 1:30 AM. I worked at a fast food restaurant and I got an antsy phone call from my dad telling me to come home as soon as possible. There were storms on the way and he was nervous about the timing. I thought he was being paranoid until I got this really uneasy feeling as well. Every nerve in my body was telling me to get home right now. I pissed off the manager when I left without mopping the floors. I rushed home and I had barely gotten into the door for 2 minutes before a tornado hit our house. Looking back on it, if I didn't leave when I did, I would have been driving along the road the tornado followed and I probably wouldn't be here. I got written up at work for leaving without completing my tasks, but a write-up is better than being dead. Family friend from my uncle's church was on vacation with us when I was around 11 or 12. I wanted to go for a walk in the woods. My mom said no. He jumped in and insisted he would go with me. She says yes. As we're walking I'm getting this weird vibe from the guy. He keeps insisting on taking pictures of me. I keep getting more creeped out. Eventually he's got my cornered and my mind just goes into total fight or flight. He's got his hands on my thighs and there's nowhere I can go. So I'm plotting in my head how I'll launch myself at him and gouge his eyes out. Just as I'm about to make my move a relative who knew he was a pedo and was worried about what would happen makes his presence known. A few years later the family friend went to prison for raping a bunch of kids, including most of my cousins. I'm pretty sure I was almost raped that day. Buying weed in Cuba when I was 16. Super nice guy. One of the first people I had met in Cuba. Had only been there 2 weeks. I asked him for weed. He was like OMG I sell weed. He's like I just got to pick it up from my house. I was no problem. You are a friend, this isn't weird. So, we enter the house, but part of the side wall is blown out into a doorway to connect all the houses on the street. I would say there is about 10. So, we are walking through these houses. It's just old Cubans watching TV. We get to the last house. It's the only one that has a door. He tells me, "Okay, I'm just going to get the stuff, you wait here." He enters. I hear him lock the door. I get the "oh, I'm about to get robbed" feeling. I turn around, I see all the doorway we're passing now have doggy gates to prevent a quick getaway. So, I bolt. I'm doing some Olympic vaulting over these doggy doors. I hear the door swing open. My friend lacks wood yet has a knife. So, I speed up. Old Cuban women are attempting to grab me. They are getting an American 16-year-old stiff arm to the face. I get to the street. He is right on my tail. Book it about 5 more blocks. I see a cop. Basically power slide behind him. Look up. I see my friend halfway up the block. Gasps. Turns around. Yeah, I made it to base. The Cuban cop said something to me. I don't speak any Spanish. So, I just shrugged and walked in the opposite direction. Never saw my friend after that. I was at my grandparents for a gathering, and me and some of the other older kids were playing catch or tag in the front yard. I can't exactly remember. Doesn't matter. The younger kids were playing in the backyard, doing whatever the hell kids do. While playing, I could swear I heard a crying / wailing / screaming sound, but it was very quiet and distant. It was one of the most horrific screams I've ever heard, but I asked the others, and they didn't hear a thing, and all insisted it was nothing. I don't know why, but felt absolutely dreadful and terrified, yet everything was fine, so I decided to go check it out. I run into the backyard, and it turns out my little sister, 4 to 5 years at the time, was bleeding severely. She was covered in blood and trying to crawl towards the house. I swear it was out of a damn horror movie. Looking back, I can't believe this actually happened. Long story short, my little cousin, 7 to 8 years at the time, decided it was a good idea to play catch with some broken glass he found in the backyard and ended up cutting her jaw very deeply. Kids are dumb. Years ago, I'm working one morning and my fiancee's off. She texts me around 10 or 11 and she says she had gone out to breakfast with her family and they bought her flowers and she was having a good morning. Blah blah. I was glad to hear that because she didn't really get along well with her family. The more the day went along, the more it all didn't sound right. Later that evening, she was acting unusual and she wouldn't tell me what was going on. So I checked the cell phone account activity and learned not only had she been texting and calling this random guy constantly, but she had been repeatedly lying to me about what she was doing or why she'd go do this and that or get off the phone with me, like to get back to work. There were so many instances where she hung up with me and immediately called him and had lengthy conversations. I then pointed at the flowers that were sitting on my table in my apartment. Really nice flowers, vase with marbles, probably cost $60 easily. I asked if they were from him. They were. That relationship ended right then and there.